I am virtually, once again, I am in West Nashville, Phoenix Lodge, number 131, with past master, worshipful brother Ryan Turbeville. And, we're doing this, a podcast. I reached out because and this I always suggest, brothers, if you're a Mason, whether you're a brand new Mason or been around for a while, try to stay up to date on social media and keep up with different groups because you never know what you might find. And in this case, I found a flyer for West Nashville Phoenix Lodge's Unity Degree, which is taking place Monday, July 17th, 2023. It's a pretty historic event. I'm looking forward to talking about it. But first, thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thanks for having me. Love to discuss this event with you and anything else Masonic related. I love talking with brothers from other jurisdictions, and it's always a lot of fun. Always a pleasure.
So I could read it out, the description and stuff, but I'll let you talk about it. What is the Unity Degree taking place on the 17th?
Sure. So essentially, it's just a Master Mason's degree, but what makes this one special is for the first time in Tennessee Masonic history, you will have the Grand Lodge of Tennessee and the Grand Lodge of Prince Hall Freemasonry in Tennessee in the same tiled room together. So up until this date, the 17th is the first time that we can actually visit each other and sit in an open lodge between our two Grand Lodges. So we've got approximately, I think, 167 RSVPs for this event so far. We actually had to shut down registration because this lodge room behind me can only hold 175, and I anticipate we will hit that easily. So, but essentially, it'll be our lodge, West Nashville Phoenix Lodge, cast members from our lodge conferring a Master Mason degree with our Prince Hall brethren in attendance for the first time ever in Tennessee history. So we're super excited about it.
And tell me a little bit about the planning that went into this. Like, I know, and I'm sure all the brethren listening who are, active know how much work it is and how much work it takes. But from yourself, I'm sure there's a committee involved, right? Tell me about the planning and how long this degree has been in the planning stages, and how exciting it is to be coming up very soon to the big day.
Yeah. So what's interesting, call it serendipity or whatever you want to call it, but we had this degree scheduled for the 17th. Probably about a month ago, we'd already had it, or 2 months ago, we'd had it scheduled. And at that time, we voted a few years back to recognize the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, and they did the same to recognize us. And then this past March, we voted for visitation, and then they shortly thereafter did the same. So both Grand Lodges, ever since those votes, have been, I guess, just working on the logistics of how visitation would happen. And we had this degree planned for the 17th. And as luck would have it, fate would have it, our worshipful master sent out a resolution saying that the first day that you could have visitation with each other, that we could have visitation with each other, was the 17th. So it just worked out where we already had a degree on the books. Grand Lodge both Grand Lodges announced that you can now have visitation. And we decided to then, shift we didn't change the degree, but decided to shift the promotion of it and invite our Prince Hall brethren. So it's really came together in the last 2 to 3 weeks, a lot of work to try to, for a normal degree, we probably have 30 people, maybe 50 on the high end. So to shift from those expectations to 175 people within the last few weeks has been a lot of work, but a lot of fun. Good work.
And where do you think the interest is coming from? this desire for brothers, and how many of those 175? I know you said you had 164, but you expect to get to 175. How much of that is either local, like your lodge area, versus state, versus do you have a lot of visitors coming from out of state? And what's the breakdown of that like so far?
I'd say a handful from out of state, mostly Middle Tennessee, but quite a few from West and East Tennessee as well, which I don't know if your viewers are familiar with Tennessee, but it's a very long state. So Nashville's kind of right in the middle, but from one end to the next, you're looking at 3 or 4 hour drive that a lot of these guys are making just from within the state. So I would say it's still probably 80% Nashville and local, with good representation though from throughout the whole state. And then as far as Prince Hall brothers, I think we're at around let's call it 50 out of those 175. So good representation from both Grand Lodges as well.
And I talked about this at the start a little bit. The promotion of it, right? I discovered this through social media. What has the response been like in terms of the different ways that you've communicated this? I'm assuming most of it was either through lodge word of mouth and social media, but what type of responses have you been getting, and have you been receiving a lot of interest or even questions from, out of jurisdiction? I'm up in Canada, things like that. Like, where's the what's that been like, and how far has it been getting?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're one of the few lodges around, and I would say not just Nashville or Tennessee, but really nationally and internationally, that as a Blue Lodge really puts an emphasis on our website and our social media. And it's probably, I don't want to say it's the number one thing we've done to help our lodge growth, but it's certainly, we couldn't have done it without it. The ability, just something as simple as the RSVPs for this event, we need to know how much food to provide. We needed to know how many chairs and tables to bring in, because again, we don't usually have a crowd of this size. So if we didn't have a website and people were having to, personally call our secretary and they were having to, our treasurer was having to collect money for dinner through checks and the way we did things literally just 5 years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, this would have been a nightmare. So the ability to have a professional, well-designed website that not only helps you promote an event such as this, but also aids in the logistics. I just really don't know how we would be able to do something like this without it, or it would be exponentially harder.
So there's two sides to, or not two sides, there's two steps in kind of the process of what you've got going on, right? There's the degree, having the lodge hold the degree, but there's also all of the steps and processes that goes into the mutual recognition, getting permission from both Grand Lodges to hold the event. At what point did it move from the, or not even what point, what was the impetus for West Nashville Phoenix Lodge, right, to basically step up to the plate and say, now that there is this recognition in place, right, we want to be the lodge to hold this event. I mean, I assume you guys are all insane to want to put on an event of 175 people. I know how hard it is to organize events for 50 people, but aside from maybe temporary insanity, what was the impetus behind your lodge kind of stepping up and taking the ball and saying, we want to hold this event, as I'm assuming, right, as a celebration of this mutual recognition and a way to really cement it? for future generations?
Yeah. Well, we say a few things. So we voted for recognition, like I said, I believe 2 years ago, as a Grand Lodge. I don't mean our lodge voted, but statewide, both Grand Lodges voted for that, and we've been working on this visitation aspect since then, which really, from my understanding, a lot of that came down to more logistics, right? There's obviously a historic racial component to the division between Prince Hall and our Grand Lodge, but I would say, you know, for the last few years, most of this has just come down to you have two historic Grand Lodges in the same state. And how do you work out those logistical issues of visitation and jurisdiction? You know, because a lot of places in the world, especially overseas, you know, they just have one Grand Lodge that's recognized, and you don't have to have this question of jurisdictions that overlap. So a lot of that stuff's been worked out between the Grand Lodges over the last months and years. From our perspective, though, as a Blue Lodge, as West Nashville Phoenix Lodge, as soon as we had recognition, we started inviting Prince Hall brothers to non-tiled events, and they did the same. And it's not just been our lodge. There's been other lodges in the Middle Tennessee area where, you know, we couldn't sit in tiled lodges together, but that doesn't mean we couldn't have fundraisers together. Or we have a monthly education night over here that is not tiled. So several of the
That's a
Prince
really
Hall
good
brothers
point.
have consistently come to these non-tiled events.
Right,
So
not
we've gotten to know
to,
these guys. We've gotten to know each other over the last few years.
I mean, I do
So
want to stop you there for just 1 second, because that's a
yeah,
really good point. I think that a lot of, you can be a Mason for 30, 50 years and not understand, right, the difference between a tiled and not a tiled event and what that means, and the opportunities you have to, so for example, to, in your case, right, to include Prince Hall, whether it's recognized or not recognized or whatever its status is at the moment, if it's a non-tiled event, barbecues, whatever it is, right? Those are great opportunities to bring, to forge connections that can pay off down the line, or
right.
that can help move things in a certain direction, right? I think a lot of brothers still fail to understand the idea of like, what is a non-tiled event and what does that mean, which can be frustrating because I think in some cases it limits the opportunities of lodges to really grow and expand or try something different if you don't, you know, recognize what those differences are. So, and I know most of our audience is Masons, some aren't, but even for those Masons, they might not know. Could you explain the difference between a tiled and a non-tiled event and what that means?
Sure. I'd say the short version, a tiled event is a event where an actual lodge is opened. Well, I'll try to also explain this to where a non-Mason would understand it. So anytime we have a stated meeting or a degree, you know, we open the lodge with a ceremony. There's an official process that you go through to open the lodge, and in doing so, those meetings are for members only. You have to be a Freemason to be at those meetings. If it's a degree, you only have to be a Mason of that particular degree. So if you are having an entered apprentice's degree, that's open to Master Masons, Fellow Crafts, and entered apprentices. But if it's, say, like Monday night, that's a Master Mason degree, only Master Masons would be allowed in that degree. Fellow Crafts and EAs, your first two degrees are not allowed in there. So the term tiled essentially is we have a position called the tiler that sits outside the door and make sure that everyone who is in the meeting has the right to be in that meeting, that the men that are in that room are of the degree necessary to be in that room. But
Okay,
a
so
lot of
then,
what we do, could be open to the public, or even if we advertise an event as Freemasons only, we may not actually open the lodge and tile it. We could do a dinner that's Masons only, and we don't go through any of the formal ceremonies or processes of tiling the lodge.
so going back to what we were discussing beforehand, right? The initial relationship between yourself and Prince Hall, or your lodge and Prince Hall, came through some of these non-tiled events, the barbecues and social events. And how did it go from that to 175 people and a unity degree? What was the progression there?
Yeah, I wish I could say there was like a grand scheme or plan, but so much of this, man, it just came together, and I think you can chalk that up to just maybe call it pin up energy. We've gotten to know these guys, we've gotten to know each other over the last few years, and there was an anticipation factor. Like we knew that this was coming, we knew that visitation would happen, would be allowed at some point. We didn't exactly know when. And then also just credit, there was several individual brothers who just really put in the work. As soon as this became a thing, they just got on the phones and text message and just, got the word out quickly. So, yeah, I think word of mouth, but the socials also, I mean, as soon as we posted this on social media, which a lot of our Prince Hall brothers follow, I mean, I would say those first 60 to 70 registrations we had within the first 2 days. So, I mean, it was just a immediate splash.
The the idea of it being like an immediate splash, right? Do you think do you think that excitement, that initial splash, it came from just the idea of a unity degree, right? It being a first, because obviously that's a pretty big deal, the first of anything.
Yeah.
Was it more the fact that, it's a bit like you hear it a lot in entertainment, right? People talk about an overnight success. It's immediate, or it's an overnight success from the fans' perspective, because one day you don't know about them, the next day you do, but it doesn't feel that way necessarily from the artist's perspective. May have been, a working musician for 7 years before getting that break, right? How much of that immediate splash do you think came from the work that you guys put in on those non-tiled events, building that social, building that fellowship, which maybe made it seem like an immediate splash, but was in fact the result of a lot of work, versus how much of it was just the novelty of everybody wants to be there at the start of something, right? And I'm assuming
Right.
there's probably been some discussion, maybe not with West Phoenix, about potentially having a unity degree every year in different lodges. I'm assuming maybe there's been discussions about that. So where do you think that initial excitement came from?
I think you're right. A lot of things that appear to be overnight really have years worth of work into them, I think this event, could have happened regardless at any lodge in Tennessee. I do think we were in a unique position to have it as big as it's going to be, and there's a few reasons for that. Like you said, it's the work that's been put into developing relationships, but our lodge can't take sole credit for that. There's guys from many lodges around the Nashville area that have also been involved and who are attending. So, that relationship building over the last few years, that's definitely not just been us. There's been a lot of work from many brothers of many different lodges involved with that. But what made us, what I do think is unique about what we were able to bring to this is our location, our building. We did a massive remodel of our building back in 2020. So we have, in my opinion, one of the nicest lodges in the state, if not the entire country.
We're currently engaged in a pretty big remodel at the Windsor Masonic Temple. Just a shout out for us. There's a lot of work going on here, so it's great.
Yeah.
It's great when lodges or when Masons take care of their buildings.
Of course, yeah. We have wisdom, strength, and beauty. Every Mason's probably heard that those are your foundational pillars of your lodge, and it always struck me as funny is not the right word, maybe sad a little bit that the state of so many of our lodges, if beauty is one of our pillars, the physical aesthetic of a lot of our buildings are not in great shape. So I'm always happy to hear when brothers are putting the effort and the money and the resources into taking care of their buildings and upgrading them. So yeah, we were able to do that. That was a lot of work, a lot of money, a lot of disagreements, right? I mean, you get a big group of people together to try to do something big. Not everyone's going to agree on how that should be done. So that's a big part of this, as I mentioned earlier.
I mean, going back to what you said, that's a huge part of. I mean, I dream of dictatorships, and I dream of being able to do whatever I want, or anybody being able, to do whatever you want. But that's not how Freemasonry works, right? It's about, especially when it comes to spending money, especially when it comes to what a meeting is supposed to be, what a meeting is meant to be, right? How do you, right? How do you work with everybody else that you have to work with in order to do what's best in some cases for the building, or even I'm sure it came with this unity degree, right? I'm sure in the organizational process there was a fair bit of discussion around the best way to proceed and the dinners and like all the logistics that goes into it, right? Like organizing
Right.
an event, and committee work or committees or the democratic process can tend to get looked down upon a little bit, right? There's a famous saying, right? A camel is a horse made by a committee.
Yeah.
But in Freemasonry, for better or worse, right, that's something that has to be dealt with. Is you have to deal with a whole bunch of different people who sometimes have very different ideas. And I guess what was your experience with that? Like, even from your building perspective, right? How did you try to navigate those particularly challenging waters of different brothers with different ideas, and asking for a friend?
Yeah. I think obviously on large, big ideas and things like spending money, at least the way our lodge bylaws are set up, every lodge can be a little different, but the lodge as a whole has to vote on those big decisions. But then we try to delegate, the work and the detail to smaller committees of qualified brothers, and that's the only way to get it done. If the lodge as a whole is literally voting on which paint color to choose and which carpet color to, there's no way we would have ever gotten this project done if the lodge as a whole had to vote on every single aspect. So I think you as a lodge have to vote to decide to do it, vote to allocate the funds, but then also appoint qualified brethren who you can just trust to get it done. And we were able to avoid a lot of stagnation because of that. We had, and then also I would say hiring third parties. So we had a committee that had experience in real estate, in design, in construction, but we still hired a general contractor. We hired a designer, so in those times when maybe the committee might not agree on everything, we could then go to an unbiased third party professional who would give their take on what we should do. And that was also very helpful. As far as this event goes, to your earlier point about things maybe not happening overnight, I think the main reason we were able to pull off this event in a short amount of time is this isn't the first event we've had like this. And the guys that we have that work on these things not only have experience maybe in their careers or in their personal life, but they have experience working together. So we do a monthly education night that is very well attended. We're used to promoting those. We're used to taking RSVPs, and we're used to having catering. So, we already have relationships with caterers. We already understand the logistical issues that we have in this building. We had an event with Brother Randall Carlson. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's been on Joe Rogan and done some stuff with Graham Hancock.
Yeah, I know.
But Randall came and spoke here, and we had 130 people for that. So 175 is definitely more challenging in this building than 130, but we've at least done it something similar before, So I don't think there's any way we could have pulled this off in the time that we pulled it off in if we didn't have those past experiences and these committees in place that know what they're doing. And not just committees, I guess, also just leadership starts at the top, right? So our worshipful master has been really great through this whole process of organizing, delegating, making quick decisions, and, just getting things done.
So, yeah, I think that brings up a couple of really good points. The first is, right, one of the ways that you're able to attract people to this unity degree is not even the degree itself, but the building, which I think is often an overlooked or underappreciated facet of the craft, is our material culture and our built heritage, which I think is really critical to it. And then also the necessity of delegation, which I think can be hard for a lot of Masons, especially when you're worshipful master, secretary, right? The desire tends to be to want to do it all yourself. Delegation can be a challenge. What would be some, I guess, lessons either from this unity degree or just in general in your Masonic career? What would be some lessons that maybe you would have to share with some other brothers or lodges that are maybe considering, doesn't have to be necessarily a 175 person event, but a larger event such as what you're planning, if they're looking at trying different things to get people more interested in Freemasonry or their lodge or attendance or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I'm a big believer. Like, delegation is not my personal strong suit. That's definitely something I have to work on. But having trust in who you're working with alleviates a lot of that anxiety, and a lot of that just comes through experience. I think lodges should definitely try to put brothers in the right position. One thing that's great about Masonry is we do give people opportunities that they might not get in their personal life or in their careers. But that said, sometimes I think we throw brothers into positions that, quite frankly, they're just not qualified for. And that's nothing to do with their intelligence or their work ethic or who they are, but like me, for example, I work in real estate. It's easy for me to be involved like in this renovation project. That's something that I have a skill set in. But if you told me to go file our taxes, I'm going to have no idea what I'm doing, So I think it's being able to identify what brothers are capable of and then putting them in the right positions to succeed is a very important thing. While also being willing to maybe put a guy in a position that, maybe he doesn't have experience in it, but you're trying to give him that experience. If you're going to do that, then you just need to be sure you're not setting him up to fail. He needs to be either around other brothers that do have that experience, or he needs to be trained in how to do it. You want to, if you want to throw a guy into something that he's never done before, you obviously want to give him the support that he needs to succeed and to learn.
And what has we already touched on this, but I think it's worth touching on again. What has the support been like from, and you can go not just at the lodge level, from your members, from the lodge up to from Grand Lodge, or Grand Lodges, I should say, because there's two, right? What has the support been like for the Unity degree on the 17th?
We'll have and we may have more than this. This is just what I know at this point, but I know our Grand Master, Deputy Grand Master, and Senior Grand Warden will be here. Probably more of the line that I don't even know about at this point. I believe the Prince Hall Grand Master will be here. They're very excited. This is years worth of work by a lot of different people. The head of our local, the Nashville Valley of the Scottish Rite, will be here, or the secretary of that body. He was, I don't know, there's definitely not one person that deserves credit for this year's worth of work, but he definitely deserves a lot of it. The Scottish Rite valleys within Tennessee years ago started, I don't want to say pushing this issue. They just did things like, going back to those non-tiled events. The Scottish Rite valleys would invite Prince Hall brothers to non-tiled Scottish Rite events. And I don't think we'd be here today without a lot of people's help. But the Scottish Rite in Memphis and in Nashville area really were a catalyst for a lot of this a few years back. So having some of those guys here is awesome, because they can. We're going to have our most immediate past Grand Master, the Grand Master from last year. He will be here. He was Grand Master when the visitation finally passed at Grand Lodge. So, lots of guys who've been integral in this whole process are going to be in the room on Monday night. And I think that's just fantastic. Not just that we have their support, but that they can get some recognition for all of their work. Because, West Nashville Phoenix Lodge, we're the hosts, and we're able to pull this off from a logistical standpoint. But as far as, actual Prince Hall recognition and how we got here today, lots of other people are responsible for that.
And I touched on this before, and you kind of nodded your head. I'm assuming that this is the upcoming is the first, but my assumption is it might not be the last. I mean, has there been discussions around annual either unity degrees or similar type of events to celebrate the recognition between Prince Hall and between the Grand Lodges?
I'm sure that conversation's happened. I haven't been in one yet. I've been so focused on like I said, this came together pretty fast. So
just get through the first one, right?
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. But no, definitely, I definitely do not see this being the last thing. Let's see, just a few weeks back, prior to the resolution allowing us to have visitation, a couple of lodges in town got together and held a joint fundraising / volunteer day. Like they went to a local nonprofit and worked together. I can definitely see those types of events continuing. Perhaps a social event of some sort. I know that's been kicked around but hasn't happened yet. But yeah, this is just the beginning. We're just West Nashville Phoenix Lodge specifically. We're maybe a mile, 2 miles away from the main Prince Hall building here in Nashville. So I mean, we're essentially neighbors, and I see no reason why something like this would continue to happen.
Now, I think it's worth talking about, and you kind of touched on it. It seems like you've got a very healthy lodge right now, both the building and the lodge itself. And you're mentioning, you're talking about 50 people coming out for degrees, which is a pretty great number based on different experiences. But it seems that though there is a kind of a bit of a resurgence happening post-COVID with Masonic lodges in general, or with Freemasonry. What have you been seeing in Nashville, either within your lodge or just in general, right, within the state and even beyond that? I'm not sure how active you are outside, but of the jurisdiction, what has your experience been like with lodges post-COVID, and have you been seeing kind of a resurgence in interest and membership and attendance and all of it?
Yeah, so COVID definitely affected us. I will say, Tennessee, and especially in the rural areas, the urban areas probably had stricter lockdowns, but a lot of the rural areas did not. Compared to other parts of the country or the world, we weren't shut down nearly as long. So, I mean, we did have a few months there where we didn't meet at all, and we couldn't do degrees for a while. But even within COVID, when I would say a lot of the Masonic world probably wasn't meeting, we were still getting together. So it didn't hurt our lodge as much as maybe some others. We're also a younger lodge, of course, so not as many of our members maybe felt as much fear about coming out or coming around as some of the older members might have, So, but as far as Masonry as a whole and what I see, we're thriving here. But there's a lot of lodges that aren't. And I think you see that everywhere. There's lodges throughout the country that have waiting lists and have, so much energy and activity that they don't even know what to do with it. And then there's other lodges that are dying. And I mean, this could be a very long conversation. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But if I had to try to keep it short, I think what we've attempted to do is embrace tradition. We're not trying to change Masonry. Change is a dirty word. We're trying to embrace and continue Masonic traditions, but just do so with the benefit of modern technology. It's not a different strategy perhaps, but maybe some new tactics, and so we've really embraced social media and the internet. We've also really embraced education. If all your lodge is doing is hosting degrees and then maybe a yearly fundraiser, there's just not a whole lot of reason for members to come back and get involved, and we're always talking about getting new people in the doors, which is important, but I think it's more important to get the right people through the door and then get them to stay and get them to be active. Uh, the statistics are, I could be wrong on this, but I think it's only in Tennessee, it's something like 20% of master masons, new master masons, are still masons within 10 years. So we're losing 80% of our guys to demit. Obviously, masonry is facing some demographic challenges with just age. We had a huge post World War II boom, and we've kind of been declining ever since. It's hard to escape those demographics. Even our lodge, as many new people as we're bringing in, I think we still barely had a net loss last year in overall membership.
1959 was the last year of growth, right? Before it dropped every year. Though I have seen it nationally, right? There's always going to be a jurisdiction, or in North America, there's always going to be a jurisdiction somewhere that maybe bucks the trend. California recently. You mentioned demit. Is that because I always think you need to divide up demit between, right, a master mason actively demitting and saying, like, I don't want to be a member anymore, versus a master mason just not paying his dues and kind of riding off into the sunset, which are kind of, it's the same result in a lodge. It's the same result maybe in a lodge books in terms of the numbers, but I think it says something very different depending on what happened and how the demit came to be. And then demit with dues owing versus not dues, right? I mean, all that stuff. Masonic statistics are really funny, right? It's really hard to gauge some of these terms, right? When you talk about growth, I mean, are you talking about just growth of overall numbers, right? How many new members did you have in a year versus how many members either passed away or demitted?
Right.
Or are you talking specifically about, okay, how many members did you join and then got their third degree? Or is it how many members are quote unquote active, and then you have to define what active means, right? It becomes a very funny, the numbers start to get funky, but I think that's true of all statistics. When you actually start to try to parse them and figure them out, it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly in terms of what is actually going on. I mean, the one thing we know is there's been a decline since 1959, and with some slight bumps here and there. But
yeah, and
what we're seeing now, it's interesting.
I'm not I mean, numbers matter, but if I'm being honest, I think the fraternity did greater things when we had smaller numbers. If you look at a lot of the buildings we built, sadly, a lot of them are being sold or are in disrepair. But some of the largest projects we've done, both from a building standpoint or the founding of our Masonic charities, widows and orphans homes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that stuff was done when the fraternity was at a much smaller scale. So I don't think we have to have big numbers to do big things. I think you just need the right people. And going back to the demit topic, you obviously have to provide value to keep people coming and involved. But a lot of that starts with, who are you letting in to begin with, and if your lodge is really cheap to join, and if you are accepting people that are joining simply because maybe they're just curious, well, is it really that much of a surprise if the guy doesn't stick around? If you make it super cheap to join and he's only joining because maybe he saw National Treasure and wanted to see what it was all about, and then he sees what it's all about, and on top of that, then your lodge doesn't really provide much except, a business meeting or an occasional degree. Like, it's really not a shock to me. I think, like, we've raised our initiation fees, we've raised our dues. Now, we're still not, I don't think it's supposed to be a country club. I do think Masonry should be for all good men. I don't think it needs to be only a rich man's club. But we've certainly made it too cheap. And I think that people value what they pay for. And I think,
define cheap, right?
yeah, well, for instance, my lodge, we found some bylaws from 1920, and I found the initiation fee back then in 1920, and then I did an inflation. I put it in an inflation calculator, and what would that be today? And it would be $1,200 to join today. Just a few years back, we were $150. That was our degree fees. Do I think it needs to be $1,200? I don't know, but it certainly shouldn't be $150. And the other caveat to all of this, right, is if there's a truly great man that you think needs to become a Mason and finances are the only obstacle, then there's plenty of brothers that are willing to help out and not fix, but aid in those unique situations, So I don't think you try to cater to the lowest common denominator. Anytime you bring up this dues discussion, someone will say, well, what about a college student? Or what about this? Or what about that? And my take is, well, if that particular instance comes up, if there is some exception out there, then just deal with that exception, but don't make the rule for the exceptions. And to me, when I think of like any other group in town that I would want to join, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or the Rotary Club, or I'm a realtor, so I'm in the Realtors Association, there's like every single other thing that I'm involved in was easily 3 to 4 times as costly as it was to join the lodge. And I don't think that's right. I think if, and I could also tell, like when we interview people, we ask them if the cost would work a hardship on them. And I don't know how many times we would explain what the cost was and guys would just kind of laugh. They're like, no, I'm all right. Because for a lot of lodges, it may be different in your jurisdiction, but in Tennessee, there's a decent amount of lodges that are still, it's $50 to $100 a year to be a member. I mean, that's nothing. Guys spend more on coffee. Guys spend more on beer, on cigarettes.
But
I'm not.
The flip. Well, I don't want to get into it. I had to deal with this all last year. Right? I'll give my take, and people can yell at me. I don't speak for anybody but myself. I don't speak for Grand Lodge. What does Masonry demand of an individual, right? In my experience, people will, I'm a very pessimistic fellow by nature, right? People will meet a standard, but not go necessarily higher than that standard, right? So,
Yep.
Right, when you talk about cheap, I know that, and other people have referenced it too. They've used cheap and expensive, pick your term, in terms of like dues, right? Like, we don't require a sufficient amount of money to demonstrate the value of the craft, which I think is fair, right? In a lot of cases, $50, $200 is cheap. But, and I've argued this often, I don't think we make sufficient demands on a brother's time to demonstrate the value of the craft, right? My argument has been, if for the average brother, if he knows I could pay $100 a year, let's say, never attend a meeting, and still be a Mason, if my goal is to be a Mason, that's all I have to do.
Right.
But if you say, no, we also make demands of your time, we expect you to be at 3 meetings a year, 3 events a year, 3 whatever it is per year, right? Then I think in terms of demits, my suspicion is a lot of these quote unquote demits are not brothers actively demitting, it's brothers just forgetting about the lodge. because nobody's requiring them to be there, right? There's no call on their time. We make, we may, dues are lodge by lodge, and I do think far too often dues are set artificially low, and that creates a system where people aren't valuing it as much as they should. But also, any type of demands upon a brother's time is set artificially low, and I think that also contributes to it, right? Because there may be a brother, you kind of touched on this. He may, for him, money may not be that big of a deal. Like, he may have enough money to be able to afford it, but time is precious, or vice versa. Like, I guess, do we set enough expectations on our brothers in terms of the time they commit to the craft, as well as the money they put into it? That's just my opinion, and then everybody hates it because we can't require attendance and cable tow and deity family work and all that stuff that I had to hear about all through last year. But I still stand by my idea that, right, it's okay to make demands upon a brother's time as well as his money. And I think doing that, I think most brothers could find a way to make it to 2 or 3 meetings a year if they knew that doing that was necessary to stay in the craft type thing.
Yeah, an idea I have that would also never ever get passed, but like, to me, I feel like if you're gonna come vote on something, you should be an active member of the lodge. We'll sometimes have votes with, guys that haven't been here in years. Potentially, they see something in the trestle board that they don't like, so they're going to show up to vote no. And obviously, you can make the argument that, well, he's a brother just as much as anyone else, and he's entitled to that. And like I said, this is not an idea that would ever actually happen, or one that I would even propose, because I know how it would go. But part of me feels like your active membership, your guys that are here day in, day out, putting in the work, should be the ones that can make the decisions as well. And for them to be held back by guys who aren't putting in as much work, that's bothersome to me. Now, the argument could easily be made, well, that guy maybe isn't putting in work today, but for 20 years he was here every week, so he still deserves it. And I get that. I understand that. The time thing is tough. It's hard to come up with a rule or a bylaw or some sort of demand on the time. I guess the way we've tried to solve that issue more than anything is like, do things that are worthy of people's time, right? Provide value to where people are going to want to be here. If, especially in an urban area such as Nashville, there's 1,000 different things that somebody could be doing. There's literally, we're Music City, USA. There is a concert, there's a sporting event, there's something every night of the week here, all year round, never stops. So if I'm competing with someone's time, if I want them to view what we're doing here as important, then we have to do important things. And that's the only way we're going to keep our guys involved. If we're simply showing up and arguing over the light bill, or doing a fundraiser that barely raises any money, and it's something that the guys aren't even interested in, it's just never going to work. So what we've done the last few years, and what's been really successful, is thinking bigger. Like this event, this 170 or 175 person event is a lot of work compared to just showing up and having a practice, right? There's way more work that goes into something like this. But our guys are happy to put in that work. They're happy to put in those hours because it actually means something. It's actually worth doing. They don't mind putting in the time on something that's worth doing.
I mean, what's your that brings up though the interesting question. I've had brothers talk about this before about, I don't know if you're seeing this, we're seeing this, I'm seeing this at least in my lodges, right? There's a divide between events and business meetings, and you're far more likely to get a good turnout of membership at events versus business meetings. Even when you include education or whatever it might be, right? It seems like there's and a lot of districts, to their lodges, districts, grand lodges, to their credits, right, are really holding some gangbuster events. I think I've used Texas as my example on a few occasions. Their last Grand Master, Brad Billings, was really pushing events, and I mean the Alamo and Gonzalez. They've done some amazing work with events. It's then getting that to translate into the meat and potatoes, if you want, of
Right.
Freemasonry, right? And getting that, and you know what I always try to impress upon guys is, I guess I'm not as, how do I put this? I'm not as concerned with lodge being a quote unquote enjoyable experience. I mean, you don't have to be miserable per se, but I think I'd rather it be meaningful. And I think in a lot of cases, a meaningful experience can oftentimes be boring, or can oftentimes be not interesting. But if you can impress upon members, even newer members, older members, whatever it might be, yes, it's not fun to hear the minutes. It's not fun to hear correspondence. It's not fun to pay bills. But if we don't do these administrative tasks, and if you're not up to date on what they are and where they are, and where the money's going and all the rest of it, you know, you don't get things like unity degrees, right? Because if a lodge is not administratively strong, it doesn't have the capacity to put on events like this, or
Right.
financially strong, right? I think, so I've really tried to press upon guys, you know, don't come to a business meeting expecting it to be the most enjoyable experience in the world. Hopefully you do have fun because you see people you like and you hang out with people you like, but come to a business meeting because the work done in the business meeting is what allows us to have, we're having a softball game. Like, it's what allows us to do the things that are fun, right? But you have to put in that work first.
Yeah.
To get to the fun part. It's like exercise.
Yeah.
I very much like a 6-pack of abs, right? That's fun. Doing sit-ups isn't fun, but you got to do one to get to the other.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a few things with that. With the meeting itself, I think having a master that knows how to run a meeting well is very key. You know, you need to have an agenda. You need to have decorum. You need to, you know, God bless the guy, he's a brother, but if some guy's rambling on for 10 minutes and not really saying much, master needs to know how to politely tell him, hey, we're moving on to this next thing, right? You know, so just having a well-run meeting is very key to not making them be boring. Having some educational aspects to them helps. We think just eating well, having good food, having a well-prepared, good dinner and good fellowship along with the meeting is important. But I'd say, you know, one thing we've experienced, and probably a lot of lodges have experienced, and maybe why younger Masons, or it's not even just an age thing, let's just say newer Masons too. One reason why I think the business meeting might become discouraging and might put a bad taste in their mouth is, you know, a lot of lodges just aren't very open to new ideas, and they're not willing to let these guys get involved. A lot of lodges struggle with, you know, let's just say degrees, for example. You know, there's some guy that's been doing one particular part in that degree for 20 something years, and now you've got a new guy that wants to do that part, and they're stingy with the parts. You know, they don't want to give up their part in the degree. I think it's one thing to sit through a boring meeting, but I don't really know if just boring is what runs guys off. I think what really runs guys off is if they're in that meeting over and over and over again, and they feel like they don't have a voice, they're not being heard, that every time they bring up something new or try to get the lodge to change in some way, they're just shot down by the old guard or the old guys. That's what gets guys to demit and to slowly fade away or just not come around. I think more so than something just being boring. I think it's when a guy is not given, when a guy is not heard or is not given opportunities to truly be involved, we lose more to that than simply being boring. Because there's no way to get around, to your point, some things are just gonna be boring, right? You know, like there's no way to get around some of that. I will say, like, specifically when it comes to bills, we pass a lodge budget at the beginning of the year. And as long as everything is within that budget, we don't have to vote on it again. So we aren't spending so much of our meeting just paying bills. If the bills are within the budget, it's just done. So, you know, there's probably some tricks like that that you can use to cut down on some of the more boring parts of the meeting. But yeah, hopefully that answered.
It does, and I agree with what you said 100%. And I also agree that the 17th is going to be a pretty special event, not just for Tennessee Freemasonry, but Freemasonry in general. I was going to say feel free to make a plug, but I guess you don't have to. You're already at capacity.
Yeah, sadly, we had to quit promoting it. There was several things we were going to do that we just said, no, can't do that. We're full.
So what
we're not going to turn anyone away. I will say that if you're a Master Mason in good standing in a jurisdiction that we recognize, if you show up, we'll find a way to get you in.
Well, then what I will say is congratulations. You should be proud of the work that you've done. You should be proud of the work that your lodge has done. Like I said, I came across it and I've been hearing about it through social media channels and stuff. And I think it's clear that it's an example of the great things that Masons, and, you know, we got to throw our brothers in Prince Hall into that, right? It's just what Masonry can do when you're dedicated and you put in the work. And like you said, right, and you don't treat it like an entitlement, but you actually put in the work to it, and great things can happen. So congratulations to you, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thanks so much for having me, and maybe we'll have to have you down here in person someday.
I'd love it. I'd love to see your building.